this Transfiguration Sunday, we continue reading from the Gospel of Mark, but move ahead many chapters and read of the Transfiguration. Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them. From the cloud came a voice. "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Reading ends here. I've been nearsighted since childhood. I remember with some vividness yet being taken to public school when I was 6 to have the old-fashioned eye test where you had the E's oriented in different ways. And so I was given glasses because I couldn't see the chart. And I still remember my utter shock that trees had visible individual leaves on them, because for years I must have just seen them as giant green blobs. Over the years, my sight has declined, but I've had a surgery and my eyesight is better now than it's been probably, except that I can't read easily, since I was probably 3. But my spiritual insight requires as much help, or if not more, than it did when I was a child. And the Transfiguration opens us up to this issue of spiritual sight and spiritual blindness and nearsighted and farsighted. In our story this morning, the disciples, only a few, have an epiphany as we close that season. They see the reality of Jesus on that mountain. They see more than the teacher and healer they've met. They've discovered his nature and the source of his very life. Edwin Muir wrote, "Did they see the unseeable?" Which is a great religious question, because the Old Testament said if you saw God, you would not live. Not only did they see the unseeable, they heard the unhearable. They got to hear the voice of the Father. They saw the light of God and heard the very voice of God speaking to them. Recently, I checked out a book from the library by the New York Times science writer. It's called roughly How We Got to Where We Are. And it takes very basic things, cold and heat, light, sound, and works through what we've done to arrive at our time in these technical marvels. One of the things he talks about is glass, and how developing a mirror, a good mirror, changed art forever, because it allowed Renaissance paintings to do something new, a self-portrait. And Leonardo talked about comparing the work of your hand to the image you saw in the best mirrors. Not long after that, with glass lenses, we saw an unseeable world. We could look at a microscope and see things that were invisible to our unaided eye, and see into the heart of a small world teeming with life and structures we had no idea existed. Around the same time, Galileo took two lenses and made not a microscope but a telescope from them. And with his little instrument, no better than a good pair of field binoculars now, he saw things on the moon that no eye had ever seen, and saw 4 moons of Jupiter around it, and opened up a scientific revolution. We see things beyond our sight all the time. We even now see with sound waves. One of the most holy, transfiguring moments anyone has been through is when you've gotten to be witness to an ultrasound showing life in the womb. So we are on this Transfiguration Sunday, considering spiritual sight, seeing into the hand of God, the very ways and being of God. Mark makes sure that we understand that we are crossing boundaries in this story, that they go from the valley to the top of a mountain, and then they go back to the valley. They go up to the mountain where visions of God had occurred before with both Moses and Elijah, and now they're with Jesus. Peter usually gets a bad rap when it's said that he wants to make 3 shelters, 3 dwellings, 3 tabernacles for the vision that he sees. He's trying to act, I think, in a proper religious way. Also, it may be that he's trying to freeze that mountaintop moment. Who wouldn't want to live in that kind of mountaintop experience and to experience all the time? But no, they're going to take that vision and carry it with them into everyday life. Not only the mountaintop experience, but the everyday parts of life down in the valley. Everyday life. Paul does a remarkable thing in his reading from 2 Corinthians. Recall that Moses himself faced shame because he was in the presence of God. He had to wear a veil so that the people felt they could approach him. Paul takes the veil and twists it. He says that the veil obscured the vision of Moses and those around him. He uses the idea that to see the full reality of Jesus is to live unveiled, to live with clear sight. Otherwise, is to live spiritually blind. We could go a step further. John Calvin famously talked about the Bible as glasses, as spectacles that helped us to see more clearly the nature and work of God. But Christians can take even one step further. Jesus Christ not only was transfigured, Jesus Christ transfigures, transforms our sight. The basic way the Christian looks at the world is through Jesus Christ. Christ is how we see God in a way we can grasp and carry into the valley. In our time, we can look with the let me start that again. I'm fighting a migraine. My visual field's off here. In our time, we can look with the Hubble telescope. In our lifetime, nobody has seen this but us. We can see light from the very dawn of creation that has traveled light years to reach us. We peer into the distant past because that's how long it's taken for the light to reach us. Sometimes our spirit insight can help us to see things we never could, but sometimes it is a veil. As Bruce Springsteen said, we can be blinded by the light. And we spend most of our time putting sunglasses or blinders on ourselves so that we can avoid the full revelation of our faith. Put differently, even with our vaunted technology, how well do we see ourselves? How well do we see our society? How well do we have spiritual insight in our day? Can we yet peer into the human heart and soul? As children, we are often afraid of the dark, but it has been said that as adults we are afraid of the light. For what we are afraid of is what we're capable of seeing and what we can identify. Sunday is a day of transfiguration. Every time we walk into church, we enter a new and sacred space because we're here to pray. This church is designed to try to transfigure our world into a new world of our eyes that we encounter when we worship here. Transfiguration is seeing our lives and those of others with different eyes. In our prayer yesterday morning before we fed folks, we prayed for transfiguration, that we could see each other as bearing Christ, and that we could treat each other with the respect that should engender. I would go so far as to say that when we come into church, we look at each other and ourselves through stained glass lenses. We may even begin to get a hint of seeing each other as God sees us. I forgot that we were having communion this morning. Communion is a sacrament, a sign of transformation, of transfiguration. What could be simpler than some pieces of bread and just a taste of juice? But those elements, just like this stained glass on my right, go so far as to say that we are taking into our lives the living Christ, that the Spirit is carrying us into the very presence of the living Christ. All of us are not unchanged when we receive communion. We are bearers of the very living presence of Christ. How can we possibly see each other the same way when we'll go downstairs to buy some candy and to grab some coffee after church, when we have been lifted into the very presence of the living Christ in communion? Our prayer every time we receive communion, and that will be every week through Lent, so we can begin to see each other as bearing the life and light of Jesus Christ. Communion takes us to the mountaintop to see the reality of God and Jesus Christ. And then, like the disciples, we carry that vision with us into every